Hey everyone, this is Mike, and this episode is a Reimagining Restaurants podcast that we're putting over into the Spoon podcast feed. It's with Brian Canlis, a longtime restaurateur and co-owner of Canlis, the most iconic restaurant in Seattle. And so we talk about his just leaving Canlis. Last week was his last day, and starting anew with his good friend from college, Will Guidara, who is, as you know, owner of 11 Madison Park and also author of Unreasonable Hospitality. It's been a few weeks since I published a podcast. That's because I was in Europe largely to participate in a workshop at the Vatican about the ethics of AI in the food system. And it was crazy because we were there during the conclave, which we were not expecting, obviously, to happen because this thing was set up months and months in advance. And so it was crazy to be there as smoke was coming out of the chimneys. And so it was really interesting, an interesting time to be there. And so learned a lot. And I did write about it over at the Spoon. So go check that out as well. So, all right, folks. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we'll talk to you soon. Hey everyone, this is Mike Wolf, and welcome to the Reimagining Restaurants podcast, where we talk to the people thinking of new ways to delight customers, make their restaurants operate more efficiently, and hopefully make some money along the way. Today's guest is Brian Canlis, a third-generation co-owner and operator of the famed Canlis restaurant in Seattle. If you are from Seattle or just follow fine dining in the U.S., you probably know about Canlis. It's a restaurant operated by two brothers, third generation. It's the most iconic restaurant in Seattle, and it's a restaurant that's credited with really helping to create and raise the awareness of Pacific Northwest cuisine. And even though it's been around for 75 years, it's a restaurant that constantly keeps reinventing itself. One that, as you'll hear in today's podcast, has a completely contemporary menu, and only one item stays constant. It's the famed Canlis salad. I actually wanted to catch up with Brian because I read in the New York Times that he's selling his share of the restaurant, picking up and moving his family across the country to Nashville, where he's going to collaborate with his longtime friend from college, Will Guidara. If you want to hear about all the different things that Canlis has done over the years to remain a special place and what Brian's plans are for the future, you're definitely going to want to check out this episode. If you haven't already heard, we're bringing back Smart Kitchen Summit in July for 10 days, 2 hours of programming a day. We have great affordable passes. We have some great speakers already. Go to smartkitchensummit.com. Check it out. I look forward to seeing you there. It's going to be awesome. All right, folks, let's get to my conversation with Brian Canlis. All right, tell us who you are and what you do.
My name is Brian Canlis. I'm the third generation owner of Canlis Restaurant. I run it with my brother. Been doing it for 19 years.
Did you expect 19 years ago you'd be in this business?
Yeah, I grew up washing dishes and working in the kitchen. Eventually got a little older, working prep and tossing salads and, doing, but this restaurant was my parents' place, not the place that I saw myself ever working.
Yeah.
I actually left home. I went away to high school and I went to Europe for a year. Then I went away to college. I couldn't afford that. So I only did it with an ROTC scholarship. So I joined the Air Force and I lived all over the world. And I did not ever see myself coming back to this place.
I think a lot of people, our listeners, probably have heard of Canlis if they're in the restaurant business. For people who don't know, Canlis is an iconic Seattle restaurant. For me, growing up in the Seattle area is that place where maybe you go for your anniversary or for like that big job promotion. For most people, because it's not a cheap restaurant. You guys are high-end culinary. And it is iconic in that it really kind of defined, and that's not an overstatement, helped define Pacific Northwest cuisine. Going back, 70, how long ago? 70?
75 this year. We are considered the birthplace of Pacific Northwest cuisine. So my grandfather's first restaurant was in Waikiki in the 40s. And because of the war, aircraft technology took a huge jump, and Boeing finally had an airplane that could fly to Hawaii instead of taking a boat. And so Pan Am opened a Seattle to Honolulu direct flight. And all of a sudden, all these Seattleites started showing up in Hawaii, and they would go to his restaurant and say, "There's no good restaurants in Seattle. Can you please come open something?" And he learned that the prohibition laws in our state were slow to change. And they had just announced that restaurants were going to be able to serve liquor for the first time instead of just bars.
Oh, wow.
And he's like, wait a minute, there's this city that's one plane ride away that they've never had liquor in their restaurants and they've never been introduced to the flavors, at least the fresh flavors of the Pacific. This feels like an opportunity. So we were the first liquor license in a restaurant in Seattle.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And Pan Am even sponsored the opening of this restaurant. There was when you walked in, a big map on the wall with a Pan Am aircraft showing the route between Honolulu and Seattle. And every day they would fly Dungeness crab and geoduck and king salmon over to Hawaii. And then when they returned, they would bring back mahi-mahi and ahi and these fish and flavors that we'd never had fresh before up in the Pacific Northwest. And
so he's running both restaurants at the same time.
Yeah, he ran both. And kind of on that airplane back and forth started, the very first Pacific Northwest cuisine, defined by the local ingredients in the Northwest, and then inspired by the technique and also a product that is available along the Pacific Ocean all around from the Philippines, Korea, Japan, China. And so it's pretty magical.
That is pretty magical. How long did is it still open? How long do the Hawaiian restaurants stay open?
So his Hawaii restaurant, his original one was called The Broiler. It opened in 1947. This one opened in 1950. He closed The Broiler shortly after this was successful because he wanted to do it, like the broiler. The sign for The Broiler was attached to a palm tree. It was like a very experimental, didn't have any money shot at doing a restaurant. And once he really went for it with this place and it worked, he went back to Waikiki in 1954 and built Canlis Waikiki, which was stunning. It's not there anymore. I'm so sad. They tore it down in the late 80s. But that restaurant in Hawaii was there from 54 to 88, 54 to 89. Along the way, there were two other Canlises. My grandfather put one in Portland on top of the Hilton Hotel, and then put one in San Francisco on the base floor of the Fairmont Hotel. Those places lasted about 20 years in the 60s and 70s. But
and this were they all under the Canlis brand?
Yeah. But this is the first Canlis restaurant with the word Canlis on it, and the only one here today.
Still standing. And I think, the news broke, and we'll get to that in a bit, but in the New York Times, they broke the news about some of the changes you're doing, and they wrote, Canlis is one of America's greatest restaurants. It's also unique. Very few restaurants make it to their 75th year, and arguably none in the U.S. that retain the same relevance and culinary ambition. I mean, that's a big thing to have the New York Times right. How has this restaurant stayed so relevant? You guys are the iconic place to go to in Seattle. When people come to Seattle from other places, they want to go here.
Yeah, this is an unusual place. We don't know another restaurant of our age, maybe in the world, that the dining experience and the menu is completely contemporary. I mean, we have one classic dish that is always will be there since the beginning and will never go away. But everything else on the menu is brand new, and the vision of the current executive chef, whoever that is at the time. So it's a little tough for some of the old time regulars who, want the menu they had 20 years ago, because we're always changing, we're always innovating. And that is not normal in fine dining old restaurants. Generally, the recipe for staying successful for a long time is repeating the thing that made you famous and successful. And so you go back and you have the classics and you get to eat the thing that was on the menu a long time ago. But to us, the thing that makes Canlis is the way we treat people, the way we make you feel. It's not what you're eating on the plate. And so
is it some of those things that you had back in that plane on Pan Am, this idea of fresh Seattle-based ingredients from the West Coast? Even though the menu changes, you stay true to that, and the head chef's always trying to reinvent that. Is that part of the core appeal?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. By the way, I have to ask, what's that one thing that stayed on the menu all this time?
It's called the Canlis salad, and it is.
Is that the one that Emmett Watson basically tried to write the recipe for? I'm trying to remember. Like he's a big fan.
Oh, I don't know that story. Maybe I know that. I know that Sam Sifton in the Times, in the New York Times,
maybe Sam Sifton,
about a decade ago, did a really fun article called "Smells Like Green Spirit" and called it one of the 10 best salads in the history of our country. It's this classic old Canlis salad that my great grandmother invented. Right where I'm sitting right now, I could turn there's this tree that my grandfather planted that is the most beautiful tree, and the whole dining room looks at it. It's a Lebanese cedar that is huge, but he planted it as a sapling to honor his mom, who is from Lebanon. And the salad is packed with mint, which is very Lebanese. It's probably the most non-Pacific Northwest thing on the menu, but it's something that people crave, people love. It's been produced in restaurants all over the country. My own mother craved it when she was pregnant with me. It was the one thing that wouldn't make her throw up. And so she ate it so much when I was in utero. Somehow I think I'm genetically built of those ingredients. But it's a delicious tossed salad. Yeah.
You showed that view, and I think another part of the appeal to me is just that amazing location. I'd love to hear a little bit of the story of how your grandfather found that location.
Yeah.
And then I do want to talk about some of the service, but how did you guys come upon that location?
He tells the story of coming to Seattle, and he wanted a place that was really special, that had a view that wasn't, I mean, at the time, fine dining restaurants were generally in big fancy hotels. He actually had an entire vision for this place, which was unique, like very unique at the time. This building was the first of many things. It was the first open kitchen in a fine dining room in the country. Back then in the 50s, fine dining, you wouldn't ever see the cooks cooking.
You never saw the kitchen. Yeah.
No, that you did if you went to a diner, but like, gosh, we don't want to like see the help, right? Like we were too fancy for that. But he wanted this place to feel like you were dining in his home. And so there are so many very subtle things about this building and this restaurant that make it feel like you're dining in a home. The dining room is carpet. When you walk in, you're not greeted by a maitre d' desk. You're greeted by a sofa and a fireplace. Even the bar top is not bar top height, it's kitchen counter height. He did all these things to make it feel like a house. And the architect that he hired, which he a great vision for because that guy went on to become one of the Northwest mid-century masters, was an up-and-coming guy named Roland Terry who primarily designed homes. And he wanted a guy who built homes. And lo and behold, the second level of this restaurant when we built it was his home. So he lived upstairs and worked downstairs, very old world European style. And he wanted to feel like you're coming over to his home. And back then he's like, if you're dining in my home, you're not going to be in the middle of downtown. You're going to be in a neighborhood and with a beautiful view if you can. And so he took apparently a protractor and he drew a circle around the center. He put the center of the protractor in downtown Seattle and then drew a circle which was less than a $1 cab ride from downtown. And he goes, as long as the cab ride from downtown is less than $1, people will come. And, we're just at the start of the Aurora Bridge. And apparently somewhere in the middle of the Aurora Bridge, if you were to go past our restaurant, it crosses over $1. So this was a 95-cent cab ride.
Okay.
So it was just within the threshold. But it was considered out in the middle of nowhere. People were like, building this fancy restaurant. Back then, there was no IVE, so it was the highway to Alaska, right? It was the Alaskan highway. Like, you're building a fine dining restaurant on the road to Alaska? Like, what are you doing? But, you could see Gasworks Park, which I'm looking at right now from our view. And back then, Gasworks was working. And so there would be flames that would shoot out of the top of it.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
People loved it.
For the people who don't know, who haven't been there, you guys are, like you said, heading north on I-99 Aurora, and you guys are overlooking Lake Union, essentially.
Yeah, it feels like we're perched on the side of a cliff almost. So we're kind of cantilevered over this beautiful lake in the middle of Seattle called Lake Union. And even the windows are all angled outwards. So you really feel like you're attached to the landscape in a special way. He angled the windows, which is really neat, so that you're not looking at your own reflection when you look through the view. So you see the view unobscured. So it's pretty neat.
And it's such an iconic place. And you guys have, I just remember maybe it was like 10 years ago, there was that big accident of that boat on the 99, and you guys served and helped out the firemen, et cetera, and served them food. So it's just a really interesting place where there's a lot of action, I feel like.
Yeah, that was only the second time we had ever closed in our history. We've never closed for weather or snowstorms, or we closed on Sundays because back in the day you couldn't serve liquor on Sundays, and my grandfather was like, I'm not opening. But I was here that morning when it was a bus full of people collided head on with one of those duck tour boat.
It was a boat that had wheels, so it could go in the water and also go on the freeway. And then
me and a few of the sous chefs were the first on the scene. It was a terrifying sight. I mean, there were 70 something casualties, not many people. I think 5 or 6 people died that day. And it was hard. It was one of the hardest things I've ever seen.
You probably don't forget something like that
No, it was traumatic. And so we were the first ones there, did everything we could with water and helping what we could. We cleared Aurora to allow a lane for the emergency responders. And then over the next entire day, there were hundreds of emergency responders. I mean, it's one of our biggest, I think, casualty accidents we've ever had in the city. And we're like, we're not going to open. We're not going to pop champagne and eat steak tonight. But no one wanted to leave. There was so much emotion in this place. So we thought, why don't we just open this place as a cafeteria for the first responders? And we did. And it turned into, I think that was almost like a healing thing, to stay in the moment, to stay present with the people. Yeah.
It's that ability for you guys to be nimble and pivot. I think that was illustrated in there, but also even during the pandemic. And one of the things I remember is they wrote about it in the Seattle Times and probably elsewhere about how you guys, at the time in 2020, no one could go to restaurants, and you guys need people to come to your restaurant to keep paying your employees, but people wanted good food. And so you guys basically turned the nicest restaurant into Seattle into a burger drive-thru. So what was the concept there?
Sure. We had a couple experiences. I was in South Korea about a month before, who had the same number of cases that we did in Seattle. And yet the whole city was shut down. And I was shocked. And South Korea had a lot more experience and was smarter than we were, I think, how to handle a growing pandemic. And then we had a friend who was operating a restaurant in China who said the stories coming from him were just terrifying. And we got lucky. I think we believed a little earlier than others that this was going to be a bigger deal. And so we made plans to do something different before we were told we had to do something different. We were the first restaurant.
You didn't wait to get instructed. You basically started to come up with a plan.
I think we were the first restaurant in the country to decide to close our dining room. But the very next day we opened with merch, and we had been planning it for a couple of weeks. This really intense, we did 1,000 burgers on that first day, a drive-through restaurant. And we also launched delivery service on day 2, and we launched a bagel shed breakfast restaurant on day 3, because we had to figure out, okay, we have this mission statement in our restaurant, which is to inspire all people to turn towards each other. And just because we can't serve nice food doesn't mean we can't do our mission, the thing that we come to work every day for. So if the rules change, that doesn't mean you can't keep playing the game. And we wanted to keep our employees employed. We wanted them to keep their health insurance. And so I also believe, I've been told by people smarter than me, those first several months, I think we were the only full service restaurant in America to not lay off a single employee. We kept every single person employed. We turned all our servers into delivery drivers, and we even took our piano players and created a live stream piano show at night. And
amazing.
We did a many series of ideas, always figuring out, look, if restaurants are there to restore, our city needs restoration more than ever. We can't close our doors. What can we do given the rules, which were always changing at the time? Every week there was a new rule to follow. And so we had to keep changing our concept and model. During the course of the pandemic, we were closed for 471 days. We launched 18 different...
It's hard to believe it was that long. Year and a half, dude. That's crazy.
We launched 18 business models, of which 2 or 3 worked. So
is anything still stick around? What has changed that has stuck around now that you guys are open and operating normally? Anything? The merch store?
One thing is we went to 5 days instead of 6, and we're still only open 5 days a week. I think we got a little bit.
And is that because quality of life for your workers?
Yeah, it's just everyone being on the same schedule, everyone having 2 days off in a row is pretty magical in the restaurant business. And once we tried it, we weren't willing to go back.
Okay. One of the things that I thought was pretty amazing I think it was last year, maybe the year before, was you guys painted the entire restaurant pink. Uh-huh. And I remember seeing our friend Scott Heimendinger showed it on Instagram. He went, I think, dressed for the Barbie party. You guys had a Barbie party.
We did.
And I remember I also read in the New York Times, you guys knew that the restaurant was yours when you guys launched that big nacho cheese fountain in the middle of the restaurant. So what is you and your brother at some point just decide, hey, we're going to just have fun with this?
Yeah, we had this moment when my brother and I took over, and we were trying to understand, how are we going to make this restaurant ours? We want to honor our grandfather, we want to honor our parents, but we don't want to repeat what they did. And so we started learning a lot about our history and diving back into all these old articles. And we learned more about our restaurant. We were surprised at how much we didn't know about the very place we worked in, and how when Canlis first launched, it really was risky, and it took a lot of risks. It did things different. It was controversial. Our grandfather bucked a lot of norms, and he had fun with this place. And we're like, wait, you can do that in fine dining? And then our parents ran this place full of values. Their whole mission and purpose was all about loving the community, loving their employees, especially in an industry that is sadly famous for not taking care of their employees very well. we have some of the highest rates of suicide and addiction and depression in any industry. And yet we're delivering restoration to guests, but we're not good at taking care of ourselves. And so we had these two legacies. We had our grandfather being this wild, risky showman of a guy, and then our parents loving people. And we thought, okay,
being great parents.
Yeah, being great parents. Okay, how could we try to do both? Could we go back to try being this world-class kind of risk-taking establishment while also still loving people, not doing it on the backs of our people? And we started just dabbling in throwing some parties that were a little more fun. I remember I was standing in the back of the dining room with my brother and our chef at the time. This is a long time ago, at this New Year's Eve party. And we were like, well, this is nice. It's like the tinkling of, stems and forks and a jazz trio in the corner. And it was a, 8 or 9 course tasting menu. And the chef turns to me and he's like, would you want to go to this party? And I was like, no. He's like, well, why are we throwing parties that we don't want to go to? And so the next year we threw a party that was, it was called Shut Your Mouth, Nacho Hair, which makes no sense. But Nacho Hair was about, we had donkeys when you walked in with saddlebags full of Coronas. And we had live animals and we had a nacho cheese fountain, and no one was allowed in the restaurant unless they had a wig. That was the Nacho Hair. And it was a wig, and we had a DJ and a dance party. And it was only half our guests came with wigs because they didn't really believe us, but we had a big box full of wigs at the front door.
You provided them not a tie. You didn't provide people with a tie at the door. You provided them with a wig.
Anyone who came without a wig because they were too cool learned quickly. They ran to the front. They're like, I want a wig. Like, it was so fun. And so that kicked off our first out of the box party, which has turned into, we did Space Prom, which was insane. We did the pirate party where we turned the restaurant into a pirate ship. We did the Hawaii party where hot tubs everywhere. And we brought in sand and a beach and turned our restaurant, the whole dining room, into a ball pit. We've had a lot of fun. And so for Canlis, which was the Barbie party, what we do is we close our restaurant for 4 or 5 days at the beginning of the year every year. And we take our executive team, which is about 6 or 7 of us, somewhere special. If it was a down year, maybe that's Snoqualmie. If it's a great year, maybe that's a beach in Mexico. And we just spend 4 or 5 days building trust and intimacy on our team and getting to know each other at a deeper level, and then having the space when you step out of the restaurant to think deeply creatively, answering the question, okay, how are we going to be relevant this year? The only thing that's sacred is our mission statement. The only thing that's sacred is how we treat people, and maybe that Camla salad. But everything else is fair game. And so what are we going to do this year that is fun, that will be inspiring to us, that'll be inspiring to our staff, that can inspire people to turn towards each other, that can bring a community together?
Yeah.
And we knew we had to paint the restaurant because we had to paint it every about 15 years. And we thought, well, we already have to paint the restaurant. So why don't we just do a coat of some crazy color for a fun party, and then we'll paint it black again. And our service director, this guy named Kyle, who's been here about 15 years, looks up at us and goes, we should paint it pink, and we should do a Barbie party, and we should call it Canlis. And we were like,
yes. Did you guys instantly, and you guys were not smoking weed at that time, probably not, but maybe.
There was no weed. There was most likely a few margaritas on the table, and we loved it. And so we leaned hard into that. We did a 2-day party, raised a bunch of money for breast cancer awareness, which was a cause dear to our executive chef, Aisha. And we went for it. We built a roller skating rink. We had we had horses that you could go and feed. We built Kendom, which was this
incredible
outdoor barbecue, manly-ish, hilarious whole area of our parking lot. And we had, food trucks and dancing. We took out an entire wall of our upstairs in order to put in a pink twisty slide to get onto the dance floor. So you had to go upstairs and then through this wall that we took out and down a slide, and then you're onto the dance floor. It was...
And that wall's still gone, I imagine. You guys make changes to the restaurant.
No, we put it back. We had to put it back.
What? That's crazy. Yeah. That's incredible.
It was great. And people thought we were nuts. They couldn't believe that the restaurant was pink. It made a lot of people angry. They thought we were destroying an institution, or, our grandfather would never approve of this. And we're like, you need to read stories about our grandfather.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
It was awesome.
That was awesome. And you talk about this in service of the customer. And one of the things I have to ask you, and you don't have to tell me, but one of the crazy things about Canlis, and I've gone there, is I just hand my keys to someone. I park the car.
Yeah.
And when I'm leaving, my car's waiting for me. It's that amazing, I don't know how you guys know whose car it is.
People think it's a magic trick. It's not. We do it with coats too. We don't believe that in hospitality, you shouldn't turn people into a number. Basically, when you give someone a number, you're saying you're not important enough for me to remember who you are. Like if Beyonce came to the restaurant or comes to any restaurant, no one's going to give her a coat ticket number. They're going to be like, well, that's Beyonce.
So everyone's Beyonce. You want everyone to be Beyonce when they come.
Yeah. And so there was a system developed back in 1950. Right when we first opened, was this idea of we don't turn guests into numbers and we work really hard to remember your car. We had a fancy restaurant group call us and say, hey, can we buy your valet system from you? We want to pay you a bunch of money because we want to do your system and no one understands how it works. And we're like, you can have it for free because no one believes us how the magic trick works. They think it's software or cameras or something. It's just caring enough to remember. And they practice. So to be a valet, you train for several weeks. You develop a system of memory to remember whose car is who. And because when you're in the bubble, which we call it when you're dining at your table, you don't really understand what's going on around you. If you were to watch, the valet walks by your table a dozen times during your dinner. They're in the dining room all night long. They see where you are. They see what course you're on. They work together. And then as soon as you're at the end of dessert, near guest check, they figure out who that is. They get the car ready. And so it's just being intentional and caring. And when we told this restaurant group, look, it's just about teaching your people to get excited about caring. Like the valets love it because normally you get a ticket, you get a car back. There's not a special moment, but our valets every night get to do magic for guests. And the guests get so excited. And so the valets love it. And it's free. It's just caring about people. And
they thought this big restaurant group thought it was like cameras and software.
Yeah, they were like, no, sorry, we can't do that. And we're like, all right.
We can't care enough. We thought we could just buy some cameras.
Yeah, they're like, that sounds too hard.
That sounds too hard. Well, so this is such a magical place that you work at. It's in your family for 75 years. And so when I saw the article in the Seattle Times, I think in February, that you are leaving, I thought, wow, that's a big deal. Like this usually doesn't happen. You could just continue to ride this out until retirement, I imagine, be comfortable. But are you looking to disrupt your own life? Why did you decide to make a big change?
Great question. When I became a restaurateur in my 20s, I was single and I tried on the shirt called Running This Restaurant and it fit. And it looked great in the mirror. 20 years later, I have 4 small kids and the shirt doesn't fit in the same way.
Maybe you just put on 10 pounds.
Yeah, I know. I've kind of like, I avoid looking in the mirror being like, so I started to grow an imagination for what would it look like to do something totally different? What would it look like to have a career and a job where I could be more present to these kiddos every day, where I could exercise a different piece of my brain, where I could maybe move closer to my wife's family, because she's been in Seattle all these years and has always dreamed of maybe living in the South. And I brought all those thoughts and ideas to my brother, who I love working with, who's one of the great humans of the world. And he said, he was encouraging to me. He was like, look, this whole restaurant, part of our ethos is that you should only be working here as long as you are flourishing as a human. And so, this great author that we love called Patrick Lencioni has a quote that says, your values are only your values if they cost you something. And he said, we wouldn't be true to our own values if you, my brother Brian, are telling me that you think you could flourish more somewhere else if I told you you had to stay. He goes, I don't want you to leave. It's going to be hard, but I don't want written on my tombstone, here lies Mark Canlis, who, was a great restaurateur who kept a great restaurant alive. He goes, I want my tombstone to say I was a great brother and I was a great father and I was a great husband. And he goes, I think being a great brother is celebrating this curiosity in you. And you've got to maybe try something else. And it was hard. And that was well over a year ago that we were talking about it. And we're going to go for it. My wife and I are going to load the minivan with our kids and we're going to drive to Nashville, which
is crazy. And you're going to be with your Will Guidara, who you knew in college. Were you his roommate? How did you get to know Will, who, for the people who don't know, was the guy behind 11 Madison Park?
Yeah, 11 Madison Park became the #1 restaurant in the world. He's also written a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, which has been a big hit.
It's a Bible. It's a Bible for a lot of people.
Yeah,
in the business.
I met Will before the first day during orientation of freshman year, and we have stayed exceptionally close every day since. He's on the board of directors for Canlis. He's a great friend.
Was his family in restaurants? Were you guys like, hey, we're both in restaurants, or how did that happen?
Yeah, his dad was a restaurateur. And so he grew up in the restaurant business, and we had an early connection, and we've always loved working together. Even back in, what year was that? 2013. I'd been married a few years, didn't have kids, which is good. But I went through a divorce, which is painful and hard no matter what. And I needed a break from Seattle. And my good brother looked at me and said, why don't you take a few months off? And so I moved to New York City and helped Will open a restaurant.
You lived the Bear. You lived out the Bear for a while. You basically
the dining room side, yeah.
Yeah, the dining room side.
I mean, you know that Will is a producer on the Bear.
Yeah, his book was featured in the Bear, right?
Yeah.
That book you're talking about, right?
Yeah, which is pretty fun. And so he and I opened a restaurant together, and it felt like being back in college. We had so much fun. It was so enjoyable, and we've always dreamed of maybe doing something together. And so we actually chose Nashville and chose to leave before Will and I even had any plan to work together. We didn't know if that was a good idea. I mean, history is paved with the skeletons of failed partnerships with friends trying to work together. Yeah. It's a hard thing to do. But he and I we just kept talking. We actually run this conference together in New York City called the Welcome Conference for the last 10 years. We knew we worked well together, but then his book started becoming bigger and getting more interest. And he was saying, look, I have more opportunities coming my way than I have bandwidth for. Maybe you can be some bandwidth. And I said, I have no idea what this first year is going to be like in Nashville. Let's do an experiment. Let me join your team for a year. Let's date before we get married. Let's just have no strings attached. Let's have fun. Let's work together for a year. And if a year from now, if we love it, well, let's talk maybe about what it would look like to do that more permanently. We don't know. Yeah. Like, I think when you're moving across the country and changing careers and changing everything, I think you should keep things as flexible as possible. And we're leaving a lot of room open for discovery. We could find out. We'd rather be friends than business partners, but that'd be great because we love being friends. But we're going to experiment with it, and we're going to see what it's like to work together again.
That's great. I mean, I think it was a year or two ago that the news came out of, Noma said that they're going to basically, in some ways, change the restaurant, close it, and kind of become like a lab. You guys are making some changes, not necessarily closing, but I think Mark said in the article that we don't know what the future is. What is the future of fine dining? Do you think it has are you excited for it? Do you think it's going to have to change?
Yeah, well, I think fine dining's always changing. It's what makes fine dining, I think, is the highest risk, highest reward, highest work in our industry. I mean, your profit margins in fine dining are historically low. So when you go to restaurant school or something, they say right off the bat, if you want to make money in restaurants, get into quick service or mid-scale casual. But like fine dining is not what you do. And it's so much more work, but yet it's so much more fun. I've worked in all kinds of places. But to keep fine dining good, to keep it worth it, it takes an enormous amount of innovation. And and if you look at fine dining over the last 20 years, it has changed dramatically. We went through this season of, I think, fine dining restaurants being chef temples where you go and bow and pay homage and you do whatever the chef tells you to do.
That's changing?
I think, yes, that's changing. I think at the end of the day, people just want to be together around a table, eat something delicious, be served beautifully, but to have the restaurant and the food and the service and everything take a back seat to the guest experience, to just creating the perfect environment for magic to happen between the people at the table, not for the magic to come from the restaurant itself. So we're always trying to find ways, how do we remove ourselves from the experience, which is kind of the opposite of being a chef temple. And so, yeah, we have all kinds of ideas and we're always thinking new things. It's fun. And when you're in fine dining, you can, I think, take risks that other restaurants can't. And for us and for the culture of this company, that's an exciting environment to work in, where no idea is too crazy. You can paint our restaurant pink. Last year we closed on the weekends, which is, suicide in restaurant world. But we did that just to experiment with the idea of what if our staff had Saturdays and Sundays off for the first time in their life, and what would that feel like as a culture? And we're able to take risks. And we love it. And we were able to take those risks, again, because our mission statement is not about being profitable. It's not about opening more restaurants. It's just about being a place that inspires people in a really special way. And I hope more fine dining restaurants get excited about how they treat people, not just their guests, but their staff and their stakeholders, their community and their vendors. That's what fills them up, is the restoration of humans, not just fancy food on a plate. Fancy food on a plate's fun, especially when it's delicious. Yeah. But it's not enough.
The people are at the center, both the employees and the customers. And that's what sounds like been the continued success thread for your company. And I think looking into the future, that's what you see as the secret. So,
amen.
Well, Brian, thanks for spending time with me, man. It's been great.
You bet, Mike.
It's been fun. I had a lot of fun talking with Brian Canlis and hearing about the magic behind the restaurant that's been defining Pacific Northwest cuisine for 3/4 of a century. It was a really great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you haven't already checked out some of our podcasts on our new podcast network, go to The Spoon, click on podcasts, and see some of the different podcasts we're bringing. We have some great hosts, including Eva Goldborn with Everything But the Carbon Sink, Carol O'Neill's Watch What You Eat, Food Truths by Eric Schulze, and our newest show, The Tomorrow Today Show by futurist Mike Lee. Check them out. I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.